Okay, so, we're ready. Great. Usual PowerPoint stuff. Okay, so here we are, it's 2012. Just down the road is Newlyn, one of the biggest grossing ports, the biggest grossing port in England, possibly UK. I think it's useful to figure out, how did we get to here? What's the situation that's led to the fishing industry being the way it is? So why not start at the beginning of the universe? In the beginning, according to one popular model, the universe was just a single mass of plasma. I'm not a physicist, so I can't really investigate fully enough how the energy and matter differentiate. Very quickly, however, they did. And what was initially a ball of energy partitioned into a matter, energy, and just space. Over time, things began to cool down a little bit. And we got to a point where the matter had solidified into a rock, water vapour had come out of the rock and started to become an ocean, and then there was of course an atmosphere as well. So far so good. So this is a water cycle, which I'm sure anyone who's ever done any sort of education in geography will probably have seen. The sun is a remote force firing radiation into the ocean, warming it up, and creating an engine that forces the ocean into the sky. Then the sky then benignly releases its rain upon the land. So far so good. However, there's a separate objective at work here. The ocean is stripping the land of carbon and nitrogen and phosphate. It's washing through the rocks and extracting all the life from them down the rivers and into the ocean. Effectively, the ocean is acting as if it wants to reduce the entire Earth, the entire land to silicon, just lifeless sands. What is this? The end result of this is that the ocean becomes a colossal source of life and fuel and food. In coastal waters, there is coastal waters are transformed into basically a nourishing soup that any organism can just sort of thrive within. Gradually, materials settle down into a sediment on the ocean floor, and then they're sequestered there and trapped until a winter storm mixes them up and releases them to the surface again, causing further life in the spring. Now, one of the consequences of this incredibly benign environment for life is that it's just a great place to live. and there's very little gravity, but the effects of gravity are sort of ameliorated, they're reduced by the buffering effects of water. So it's possible to get very big. The shark agrees. And so, faced with these conditions, the only way to ensure you have an adequate share of the nitrogen and the carbon that are floating in the water is to be bigger than someone else, and so you can encapsulate it within your own body. The sharks are particularly good at this, because this is the one I chose because it's a very big mouth. But this is a general property of ocean life. It's incredibly competitive. There's no real routes for escape because it's a three-dimensional environment. And the competition leads to strange solutions. Now, the strangest solution that's been found by life on Earth was to actually go and live on the land and avoid huge predators. So some time passes, and we find ourselves in the last glaciation about 2.5 million years ago. Due to a strange sort of breakdown in the relationship between the sun and the earth, Milankovitch cycles, the world becomes colder, ice caps spread down from the poles, and there's less water vapour in the atmosphere. What this leads to is a number of primate species being forced out of their tropical jungle homes and becoming more and more adapted to living on savanna. This, of course, turns to mankind eventually. So, we're in Africa, We need more food than we can adequately get. We're following herds of animals. Some of us begin to investigate the potential for actually living off things we catch from the sea. By the time of the sort of Middle Stone Age, there's substantial evidence from bones that people are eating more and more marine life, and it's actually a significant component in their diet. It's probably maintaining populations of humans around the coastline. So, at the moment though, as an organism, we're not really differentiating from any other creature on Earth. We're wandering around, hunting down animals, foraging for plant life. And then, for some reason, there's an immense cultural shift. Humans begin to switch from a nomadic lifestyle to a more sedentary one, where instead of relying on their own muscle power and their ingenuity to capture organisms, they actually start to develop societies where they can coordinate activity and also build up territories which are then defensible, initially on land. And this is my hypothesis for how the Neolithic really takes place, is that this is a burial mound. This burial mound is effectively saying, we as a people occupy this piece of land, and we have done so for a significant period of time. It's significant, I think, that it's on a headland, so it is in some way laying claim to the ocean beyond it. Obviously, in this part of human civilization, there's no real way to extend the remit of this people beyond the visible horizon. With sort of progressively improved mathematics, though, it becomes possible to actually understand the surface of the planet. And so, by the 14th, 15th century, we've got to a place where the actual surface of the planet has now been entirely divided up. There's no longer the need to actually rely on small landscape, small features, rocky outcrops, or river mouths. The entire planet can now be actually described through a sort of abstract series of lines. This eventually progresses into modern day with a GPS system where we've completely abandoned the need to actually understand the surface of the planet at all. We just have a cycle of satellites in geostationary orbit which allow the ultimate arbiter of where we are on the planet, dividing up the surface between different organisations. So, we've entered, to recap a bit, we've got to the Neolithic. Human civilization has divided up its coastal areas into a place where they can actually extract resources to maintain their own culture. But there's a sense that this isn't really the right thing to do. And what's interesting is that just before there's a shift from into agriculture from hunting just as there's a shift into agriculture, there's a massive abandonment of marine foods. It's almost as if people, when they began to practice agriculture, recognised that this previous lifestyle they had of relying on marine protein was in some way repugnant or in some way a betrayal of their new set of beliefs. So, in burial mounds like this, bones have been analysed which indicate that actually, for no reason at all, even though they had adequate boats, and indeed there's actually ritual burials of pieces of fish with these interments, the people themselves were avoiding fish, so that they'd actually prohibited themselves from the bounty of the sea, perhaps to sort of reaffirm their commitment to the land. And this anxiety about the sea, and perhaps a recognition that even when communities had grasped the sea, had captured it, and had stated, this is now our piece of ocean, this is our resource, there was still an awareness that perhaps they shouldn't be doing this, and that it was in fact, it was a taking of the liberty. So this is a quote from an interview with fishermen in the 17th century. And yes, the fishers look on all Morecambe's hares to be devils and witches. And if they but see the sight of a dead Morecambe, it sets them trembling. Morecambes are most terrible, and they have bad luck. None will go to sea that day if they see a Morecambe, or if a wretched body is put in a Morecambe. Oh, sorry, it's put in a Morecambe's fit in their creels. Creelers are lobster pot. They need not live in that day, as it will be bad luck, either broken backs, or legs, or arms, or they will hear bad accounts of boats at sea. Now what's interesting is the Morecambe is it's a hare, and the hare is one of the species of animal which is associated with hunter-gatherer lifestyles. It's readily available, and that sort of interest in the hare is perpetuated later into Celtic mythologies, where it's one of the sort of holy animals. So there's clearly some sort of relation going on there between Mesolithic practices, Mesolithic subsistent lifestyles, and fishing, where there's an incompatibility between the two. How can we carry on fishing, a Mesolithic thing to do, when we're actually now civilized people? But we did carry on fishing, and we've somewhat long. So, initially, fishing gears were developments of standard hunting practices, nets, spears, but then they gradually progressed and become more and more suitable to a marine environment. And one thing they do is they implement that principle which was first exemplified by sharks, of having a map, basically size. So size counts in this instance, and effectively we're looking at a progressive developing technology for simply encircling prey. There's three basic sorts. There's nets which are dragged behind you, or there's traps you put on the ground. Finally, and sort of bucking this trend, there's the use of deception, hooks and lines, where rather than trying to encircle prey, you attempt to outsmart them by presenting yourself as a food source, which then transforms them into a food. Associated with this sort of simple technical development, there also becomes developments in both the ability of boats to travel further and further from shore, and also the ability of humans to progressively track down their prey better. To a point where nowadays the modern fishing fleet is effectively using sonar technology, which is very close to military specifications. Inevitably, with this process, humans will rapidly begin to outsmart the animals. A good case study of this is whaling. So initially, whaling, which has been practiced since the Middle Stone Age, was an activity undertaken by communities of people in boats spearing whales within coastal waters. Gradually, the ability of whale fat to be transformed into candles and engine lubricants within the early Industrial Revolution led to whales becoming a valuable source of energy and a driver for the Industrial Revolution and for increasing urbanisation. The logical consequence of this is that whalers were willing to go further and further from shore. Now, and the logical consequence of that was there were fewer and fewer whales captured. So if anyone's read Moby Dick, for example, most of that is taking place in Arctic waters, simply because all the whales from more tropical areas have been eliminated. However, that wasn't perceived to be the case at the time. The fundamental assumption was that the sea was a limitless source of life, and that if something was difficult to capture, that was because it was gone somewhere else. And so with whales, the assumption was that the whales that could no longer be captured were actually hiding under polar ice, and were appearing in sort of boreal lagoons, effectively, to come up for air. And then once we had stopped whaling for long enough, they'd just come back down again. Over a time, by the beginning of the 20th century, it's become apparent that that may be an optimistic aim. And an organisation called the International Committee for the Exploration of the Seas was developed within Europe. And this is what they came up with. It's very much a product of the Age of Empires. And so there's a whole miasma of boundaries there, taken from the longitude latitude system, national boundaries, and some entirely contingent boundaries, like a 200-kilometre boundary around Ireland, which seems to divide up some very logical grid cells. Now, this system for dividing was originally developed simply to record the number of fish that were captured in each section. So human civilization could develop a better understanding of fluctuations in fish population. Over time, this research developed into a philosophy of something called total allowable catch, where each individual nation was given an amount of fish that it could actually responsibly land. The actual concept is quite problematic because no one can adequately model the behaviour of the entire oceanic ecosystem, so it's always going to be an approximation of how many fish could really be landed. With the advent of the EU, this idea was then transformed into a quota system, where each nation, which previously had simply been recording the amount of, say, cod captured, would then have a share of the total European fisheries production. It was based on a principle called relative stability, where each nation would be given exactly the same percentage as it had in the 60s, say. So say the French had 50% of all the cod landed here, they would, in perpetuity, have 50% of all the fish that were able to capture there. So this quota quickly becomes a form of real estate, where both nations and individuals are trading their allowances. The reason for this is actually, with the technologies available to fishermen nowadays, it's actually very easy to catch more fish than you'd ever really be responsibly able to land. And then a system emerges where people trade the fish that they have captured to nations that are willing to reduce their fishing effort. And another consequence of this is that at an individual level, fishermen quickly group together into fishery producer organisations to ensure that, in a system not unlike medieval guilds, they can trade their surpluses and their deficits between different regions of the country. 5 minutes. Thank you. So, underpinning the system of trading is a production which is simultaneously financial and primary production of plants. This is a map which could represent plankton in the ocean or numbers of fish. What it actually represents is the intensity of money generation. So the blue areas are, and this is for trawlers, so the blue areas are quite poor, and the yellow areas are the most sort of remunerative. So in some ways, we can see them as peaks, piles of cash on the ocean floor, which logically anyone who wants to make a viable business of fishing would have to head towards. Here's a literalisation of that metaphor. So this is the same data for the whole country, and just to sort of give you a notion of the scale that we're talking about. So this would be Brittany. The white shape there is Ireland. So, and everything's to scale here. Each metre of height in these large rectangular mountains is £1 of landings. So some of those large peaks, we're talking about millions of pounds of fish landed every year. So unsurprisingly, fishing boats are going to congregate in these areas. So this is a bit like, and they're behaving in ways that's very similar to large predators. So in some ways, what was originally been an ecosystem with large fish species aggregating on places where there's a large amount of plankton in the sea body, are now replaced by large populations of fishing boats matching that behaviour. So it's a bit like a technically enhanced Serengeti, where rather than having, say, zebra attacked by lions, we have zebras being pursued by large mechanically enhanced rowing boats, which I'm going too far with it, but so, and one of the critical things about this is the production of bycatch. So there's fishing quota, which allows people to catch X amount of fish and no more. We have super fishing practices that allow the fishing boat to target a population of prey very accurately and then empty the area. What happens to the rest of it, of the fish it catches? Well, what happens is that that fish has to be returned to the sea because it's not allowed to be sold. So all the carbon and nitrogen that has been sequestered into the bodies of these animals then has to be put over the side of the boat and returned to the seafloor as sediment. So that's like a foreshortening of the whole nitrogen cycle that we saw during one of the earlier slides, where erosion is pulling things into the sea. Here, mankind has actually cut out the land component completely and brought it and made it so that all the cycling takes place in the ocean. I think it's time now to finish with some reassuring words from William Barham. So at the close of the whaling industry in the 19th century, when it was clear that that there wasn't enough whales around anymore to actually maintain a decent whaling industry. For the book, Grand Old Whalers, William Barham was interviewed, and this is his thoughts on how to manage maritime resources. At one time, it was almost thought that the world would stand still if the supply of oil of whales should cease. The supplies did cease, but the world still goes on, and what was half a century ago so highly valued is now scarce and missed. Science and nature have ministered to man's necessities, and a far better oil of illuminating purpose has been supplied in such abundance that homes of the poor are supplied with a better, cheaper, and more healthy illuminator than whale oil. Thus, we have an assurance that the needs of man will always be in some form supplied by a bountiful providence.